You're live.
Good afternoon and welcome to this online meeting, What Next for the Assange case. As many of you will be aware, last month at the Old Bailey, the District Judge Vanessa Baraitser ruled in favour of Julian Assange, denying the Justice Department's request to extradite him on mental health grounds. It's a significant victory for the campaign to secure Julian's release and, of course, for Julian's family. It's not a victory for journalism. Judge Baraitser refused to accept Julian was acting in the capacity of an investigative journalist, despite WikiLeaks having won numerous high-profile awards for journalism, and rejected the defence's public interest argument. Instead, the verdict was based on Julian's mental health, without due consideration of which we'd be looking at an entirely different verdict, with profound implications for journalism. So, as it currently stands, Julian is still incarcerated. Belmarsh, having been denied bail despite having been discharged from extradition. The Justice Department is continuing to seek extradition under the new administration and last week filed an appeal against Baraitser's ruling, shattering any illusions of a more lenient approach under Biden. If successful, Julian will be indicted on 17 charges of espionage under the archaic 1917 Act, which has no public interest defence. He will almost certainly be convicted and could face up to 175 years in a supermax prison. So, what next for the Assange case? Here to answer that question is an excellent panel of speakers. I am delighted to welcome Tim Lazard from the National Union of Journalists National Executive, filmmaker and campaigner Susie Gilbert, Professor of Political Sociology and Director of Spinwatch, David Miller, and each of our panelists will speak for about 5 minutes and then we will each take questions and contributions before summing up. So if you can add your questions and contributions to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to our first speaker, Tim Lazard.
Hi, thanks, Cara. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along. My name's Tim Lazard. I've been a journalist for 30 odd years or so, and I represent the southwest of England on the National Union of Journalists Executive. I'm a former president of the NUJ. And I'd just like to start by saying that our position as the National Union of Journalists has always been one of opposition to the terms on which Julian's extradition was sought, rather than taking a position on Julian himself. Now, worryingly, the decision to refuse to extradite him was nothing to do with freedom of expression, media liberty, and a right to know. It was because the judge decided that the US penal system would prove oppressive to his mental health and might result in his suicide. That the right decision was made for the wrong reasons is of little comfort to us. We're very concerned about the accusations in the indictment in May that Julian had unlawfully obtained and disclosed classified documents relating to national defense and actively solicited US classified information, including by publishing a list of most wanted leaks. He engaged in real-time discussions regarding Chelsea Manning's transmission of classified records and actively encouraged Manning to provide more information. In other words, he was doing the job of a journalist. He was cultivating a source to provide information. Now, they want to prosecute him for activities that we as journalists undertake every day of our working lives. Now, our major concern is if he is extradited and prosecuted, it could create a precedent that US administrations could deploy against journalists anywhere in the world if their stories relied upon information gleaned from classified documents. And no one's suggesting that if he is prosecuted successfully, that the US will then initiate actions against every reporter who relies for a story on leaked and classified documents. No government would have the time or the resources to do that. And anyway, the US government frequently leaks its own material when it suits itself. But a legal menace selectively deployed is arguably more effective than that. Any journalist in receipt of classified information might reflect that in all probability they could rely on the leaked material, but they wouldn't know for certain. At the back of their minds, they'd be thinking about the Assange case, and self-preservation might lead to self-censorship. It goes beyond journalists, of course, it goes to our sources as well, to whistleblowers who would fear coming forward. People fearing to come forward to shine a light into the dark recesses of government is a dark day for democracy, for journalism, and it's a fate to be feared by any journalist, any individual who cares about our trade, who cares about freedom and our ability to report the truth. Now, equally as concerning for us is that the judge's ruling had similar charges been brought under the UK's Official Secrets Act, there would have been a case to answer. Now, this has prompted us as the NUJ to look at our campaigning around a very simple demand, that any revision of the Official Secrets Act, and we understand there is one due in the next year or so, any revision to the Official Secret Act should include a straightforward public interest defence that is applicable both to primary and secondary disclosures of confidential material, and that is to be determined by a jury. Now, this would provide some protection both for government employees who leaked material and for journalists, our members, who publish such information. So in summary, from our position, the legal vices being deployed to try and take Julian to the US are unprecedented and terrifying for anyone whose journalism touches on state security, defence or espionage. If he's sent from here to start a prison sentence that could be as long as 175 years, then no journalist is safe. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Susie, we'll move on to you.
Hi, hello everyone, and thanks for having me. I'd like to say that, as John Rees pointed out in another conversation recently, Julian's position is arguably, has arguably improved for the first time in over a decade. And potentially the end of this long, long journey is in sight. And even though he's sitting in Belmarsh and shouldn't be, there's more positive momentum than ever. He is going to go into this appeal process with a really firm footing and in a really strong position. The reason for that is that he won the case based on something that's pretty hard to reverse now, which is ultimately a verdict on the brutality of the US prison system, that somebody like Julian could well not survive the prison system. That's going to be hard for a high court to overturn because that's pretty fact-based. It's not super subjective. The facts are there. The Judge Baraitser could review that information. So it's, Julian is going into this appeal in a strong position. And there's been more positive momentum around this case than ever. There was a lot of attention around the push to pardon Julian just before Trump left office. It seemed to be trending on social media. There was a lot of noise, and it was an opportunity to bring attention to Julian's case again in a very, very busy news cycle. And just a few days ago, there was a big push to the Biden administration to drop the prosecution. And that was a big letter that was signed by about 30 press freedom groups in the US, press freedom and human rights groups. And so, there are moments when it can seem like this is a lonely battle, a very unfair battle, which it is, but it's important to remember just how much institutional support there is for Julian, despite all the, politicking and all the attacks on him personally. I'll pop that letter in the chat. I'm sure most people have seen it. But as John has said before, it's important to keep the focus on the political points of his case. That while he's won on one area, it would be great to see the pressure maintained on the important press freedom issues. So my takeaway is that he's in a strong position. This case could be over in a matter of months. And it's the crucial final stretch where we all need to keep making noise, keep doing these events, keep pressure on the Biden administration, keep showing that there's mainstream support. And, remember, he's going in on firm footing, and he could win this. And this could be resolved, in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. David, I'd like to hear from you.
Hey, hello everyone. Yeah, the Assange case is of course a landmark case and will be remembered for many years to come. And people have been talking about secrecy and state security and the difficulty of getting news out about such matters. And I wanted to sort of start by reminding us all that of David Lee's famous little statement that he had in his book, The Frontiers of Secrecy, from 1980. I think maybe John and Tim are the only ones who are old enough to remember that book, but I do as well, which is that the obverse of the secrecy coin is always propaganda. And of course, the reason that they wanted to get Assange, part of the reason was that they didn't want the footage of the American helicopter gunship opening up on Iraqi civilians, including actually journalists in the streets. And they didn't want that information to go out to the public so that we would know even more about the horrific crimes caused by the invasion of Iraq on, as we'll also remember, on a false prospectus on the basis of a propaganda campaign to convince us that there was an actual threat from the Saddam Hussein regime. So the secrecy is not just something which civil servants have a reflex for, which of course they do in this country, but it's also something which is there to guard their information so that we can't know how our society operates. And we can't know, especially in relation to issues of national security, foreign policy and defense, we can't know what it is that the government gets up to in our name, except in carefully controlled slices of hopefully anodyne news coverage, which is what they largely get on the mainstream news every night. So secrecy is intimately bound up with propaganda. Now, the peculiar British disease of secrecy is such that it's not just that there are things which are secret, but there are also things which the government says are not secret, but which they would really rather you didn't report, if that's okay, old chap. And they do that through an informal committee called, as everyone will know, well, actually, you probably don't know, through the committee which is now called the DSMA committee, for probably better known as under its old name, and that's probably why they changed the name in the way that they changed the name of Windscale to Sellafield. The D-Notice Committee. And now this is a committee, extraordinarily enough, which is made up largely, there are some civil servants there from effectively representing the intelligence agencies, but largely made up of journalists who regularly trot along to these committee meetings, and the minutes are published these days, and they listen to the civil servants and the spooks tell them what it would be really nice if they didn't report. And quite a lot of the time, it seems they don't report this. And it's not because it's against the law for them to report it. It's just because the government says it would really be rather nice if we didn't do it, and they just do it. And that's the extraordinary kind of position we're in with secrecy in this country. And recently, well, how recently was it? I just pulled up my machine here. Oh, 2018. So in 2018, we got hold of two D-notices issued by the D-Notice Committee. Now, these are documents which the D-Notice Committee has previously said don't exist. There's no such thing as a D-Notice that's slapped on the media. Well, as it turns out, they do exist. We published them in 2018, the ones on the Skripal affair, diverting attention from the connections between Sergei Skripal and his MI6 handler, who lived very close by to him in Salisbury. And I don't want to go into the Skripal case, but this is an indication of the deeply sinister way in which voluntary agreements between government and the media curtail the public's right to know the what shall we say, the misconduct, let's put it in a polite way, of state actors. Now, the most recent bill that's just gone through the Commons, which were disgracefully one of Starmer's many disgraces, the Labour Party didn't vote against it, will make that, institutionalise that much further. It will make it legal for the spooks to commit crimes, and of course they won't be crimes anymore because the spooks have committed them. And so we're living in a society where increasingly, and this has been, I suppose this has been the case for a while, but increasingly the state does not care what we can know. It doesn't want us to know anything at all. It wants to be able to commit crimes by intelligence agents, and it wants to be able to close down all information that there is on how the powerful actually operate. And this is a fairly big crisis, I think, of public communication, where censorship and secrecy are the rule of the day, even in the even in the supposedly massively open age of the internet. And of course, that's what the spooks have been responding to in the Assange case and WikiLeaks case, the possibility of mass transmission of digital information, which they hadn't really anticipated could be done in the way in which it was done for the purposes of journalism and exposing power holders. And so we live in a period where there's a huge attempt to clamp down on the possibilities of us knowing anything about what the secret state is up to, but also where we see the tech companies engaged very closely with the state and with various Western states, trying to censor, especially anti-establishment political commentary. We've seen various political parties have their social media accounts suspended recently, and a whole range of independent and critical and radical journalists who are uniformly, slandered as being racists or anti-Semites or whatever is the term du jour to slander the left in order to get them removed from social media. So that there's a kind of context to this, which is there's the overweening secrecy of the state, but there's also a massive attempt to curtail the possibility of free communication, which is a genuine threat to the people in power. So I just want to end there and say that the importance of the Assange case is that he represents, and WikiLeaks represents, a genuine threat to Western elite power. That's the first and most important reason why we should support the case of Julian Assange and try and make it possible for as many people as possible to get access to information which they can use to properly evaluate the people who they're called upon to vote every 5 years. And just one thing to close on one little bit of information. I mean, in the last 2 and a bit years, the Anonymous Collective have been leaking government documents, first from a government-funded Foreign Office MI6-funded project called the Integrity Initiative, and then latterly, at the end of last year, and just more documents released, the 4th tranche of documents released only last week, documents from the Foreign Office on its funding of subversive activities in Syria, in Lebanon, and indeed in Russia. Now, these are tremendous service to public information, but they don't get very much traction in the mainstream media, and probably not enough traction in the independent media either. And I think for the left going forward, this is one area where there's a real need to put resources into proper investigations of such materials, because the mainstream media will not do it, and otherwise this stuff will not get the kind of traction it really deserves. And I mean, there should be public inquiries about each of these leaks from Anonymous, but so far we've had really virtually nothing apart from one complaint which we helped to make to the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator about the Institute for Statecraft, which ran the Integrity Initiative programme, which got it closed down, to be fair. So there's a huge scope for people on the left and in the independent media to be doing much more proper digging, as well as what should we say, propaganda, which of course we have to do too. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Just to say, we have got solidarity greetings from Ireland and Tasmania, and to thank everybody on the panel for all that you do individually. John, we'll come to you next.
Thanks very much. Well, look, I won't elaborate any more than my fellow panelists have done the central contention at the heart of this case, but just to restate it in the simplest possible terms, because it is a case now, one way or another, that's been going on for 10 years, when Julian was in the Ecuadorian embassy for 6 of those, another couple of years now in Belmarsh, and there's been an enormous amount of rumour and innuendo and stories swirling around the case. But at its heart, it is actually blindingly simple. It is quite simply this: do you believe that you have the right to know what your government and what private corporations are doing in your name? In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Guantanamo Bay, with their diplomatic agencies around the world? And if your answer to that question is yes, I think I should be able to know that, then you're a defender of Julian Assange, because that is precisely what he put into the public domain, and it is the only issues for which he's being prosecuted. I've been in the entirety of this extradition case, and it is absolutely clear from the American lawyers that this is what they want to try him for the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs, the details of Guantanamo Bay, and the diplomatic cables. Nothing else. That's what's on the table here. That's what he's being tried for. So I repeat, if you think you should know what's being done with your money, indeed what's being done with your fellow citizens' lives, then you should be in favour of Julian Assange walking free. And enormous numbers of people have now got this message. Amnesty International and 40 of the world's leading NGOs. In fact, no leading NGO has failed to stand up now on this case. The National Union of Journalists has been a long time campaigner on this, but now so is Unite the Union, so is the National Education Union, so is the Train Drivers Union, ASLEF. There's a whole bunch of MPs campaigning on this issue. And let's face it, when it's the editorial line of the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, and the Guardian, somebody somewhere has realized that there's something serious at stake, and it is indeed the future of a free press and the ability of journalists and whistleblowers to tell you things which the rich and the powerful don't want you to know. And to be honest, if they couldn't do that, there wouldn't be any journalism worth reading. There would simply be press handouts. You could go to the ministry or go to Google or go to Lloyd's Bank or whoever it is, get their publicity release, and that's what you'd be entitled to know. It's only news, it's only investigative journalism, certainly, when you're being told things that they don't want to put in a press release. So that's what's at stake here. I just want to talk a little bit about campaigning, because Susie was right when she said that we're at a decisive moment. I don't think any of us expected the judgment to land where it did in January. In fact, most of the judgment certainly didn't land there. I was listening to it live. I was tweeting it as it took place. It was a judgment which upheld the American prosecution's case on every particular. Took 45 minutes for the judge to read out its summary. In the last 4 minutes of that, she suddenly said, oh, and by the way, the American prison system is so oppressive that Julian would be a suicide risk, and so I'm refusing the extradition. Nothing of what she'd said previously could have possibly led you to the belief that that was how she was going to conclude it. So we've got a very peculiar, and as Tim was saying, a very hostile judgment to journalism. So I just want to make a couple of remarks about that. The United States are, of course, appealing this and trying to get the extradition reinstated, and they're trying to do it on the basis of saying, oh, well, the American prison system is, you know, practically a Butlin's holiday camp and he'll be perfectly safe in it. Now, we obviously have to fight it on that basis, and there is, let's face it, plenty of information about the brutality of the American prison system. I'll just give you one statistic. Prisoners in American prisons are 5 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. If you were going to be treated, as Julian probably will be, to a supermax prison, I'm sure the rates are higher still. So yes, we have to contest it on that ground as well. But we cannot let go of the central argument about the freedom of the press and about the freedom of journalists. And so I know that Julian's legal team are considering very seriously what's called a cross appeal. That while the Americans will appeal to try and get the extradition reinstated, the defense team can appeal the rest of the judgment and say, we don't like what the judge had to say about there being no public interest defense, about there being no freedom from the Official Secrets Act, about journalists and whistleblowers not having the protection of the courts on this kind of case. So I hope that we'll be in a situation where, in parallel to contesting the American appeal, we'll also be able to try and reverse some of that judgment. And I'm sure that NUJ is my union as well as Tim's. I'm sure we'll be able to continue joint work on that with many other people and organisations interested in the freedom of the press. So that's the first point about campaigning. Second point I want to make is about Julian's condition back in Belmarsh, back in a high security prison, not even allowed his winter clothes, so that in some recent days he's been stuffing books and clothes into the window to keep the cell above freezing in the night, boiling his kettle all night, wearing 2 pairs of clothes, having to layer up even to go into the exercise yard. And that needs to be contested by campaigners as well. I'm glad to see in the chat greetings from the Irish anti-war movement, because I want to congratulate the work that's been done on the Assange case in Ireland. Fantastic to see Claire Daly, the Irish MEP's speech in the European Parliament on the Assange case. Everybody should get onto YouTube and watch that, and not least because it's a shock to see an elected politician doing precisely what they should be doing, campaigning against cases of injustice. I also want to congratulate Paul Gavin, the Sinn Féin MP, because he's joined in an initiative that was taken by Richard Bergin and some other MPs to request that Belmarsh allow Julian Assange to give a video briefing to MPs. Robert Buckland, the Justice Secretary, simply said, "Oh, that's not up to me, you'll have to ask the prison governor." So, I mean, actually, it should be up to him, because if elected representatives in this country, MPs from all parties, request that a remand prisoner, i.e. somebody who's in prison but has committed no crime, who's just had an extradition case turned down by the magistrates court, can't inform elected representatives, then it's a bad day, not just for the freedom of the press, but for democracy more generally. And I'm very glad to see that Paul Gavin and other parliamentarians in Ireland have now requested exactly the same thing, that Julian be allowed to brief them in a video call as well. So I think an important part of this campaign right now is that Julian Assange's voice should be heard. Even the Tory MP David Davis, when I phoned him to tell him, because he's taken an interest in the case, when I phoned him to tell him that the verdict had gone against extradition, he said to me, "So he's walked free? He's walked out of the Old Bailey?" I said, "No, he's been carted back to Belmarsh." He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that somebody should be cleared on this charge, have no charge against him, and still be committed to a high security prison. So that's an important campaigning point as well. Overall, though, I just want to conclude with this thought. The tide has turned on this case, turned in terms of the press, turned, I think, in terms of lots of people's perception in the society about how important the issues were at stake. But that doesn't happen automatically. You know, the editorial board of the Daily Telegraph don't just wake up one day and decide, oh, I think we've had it terribly wrong about Julian Assange. We must issue an editorial saying that he shouldn't be extradited. That isn't what happens. And judgments like the judgment in Westminster Magistrates Court don't happen just because the judge decides to have a humanitarian moment at the end of a hostile judgment. They happen because of the pressure of public opinion. They happen because the political environment around a case changes. Clive Stafford Smith, the lawyer, said, I think actually in evidence at Julian's hearing, that court cases are won 50% in court and 50% in the court of public opinion. And the court of public opinion is now beginning to speak very, very resolutely in favour of Julian Assange. And that's down to the campaigning. That's down to what people like you watching this broadcast and hundreds of thousands of people like you are doing. And I just want to end with this point. Never think that what you can do is too little, because every great movement, every movement for change is a mosaic of small acts. It's not too little to repost this video on your Facebook page or your social media feed. It's not too little to sign a petition. It's not too little to write to your MP. It's not too little to hold a meeting like this or get a resolution through your trade union or community or Labour Party group. It's not too little to talk to your friends or your family or go to your church or your mosque and talk about this issue. That's the way in which it becomes dominant, the dominant view of ordinary people that something has got to be done. So carry on the work and carry it on now with greater intensity than before, because this is now going to be settled, not in a matter of years, but in a matter of weeks and months in the appeal court. Time is short. We have momentum. We have wind in our sails. Let's make sure that at the end of this, Julian Assange walks free.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you for everything that you do as well. And as John says, it's not just about the campaigns, it's about everything that people at home can do to help out as well. So if you haven't already gone and had a look at the Don't Extradite Assange website, go and have a look at that. There you will find all sorts of latest press releases, news, court reporting, events that you can get involved with. You can also still donate to Stella's, that's Julian's partners, crowdjustice.com Assange appeal. So that's www.crowdjustice.com/case/Assange appeal/. There you can donate to his legal defence fund. You can also watch another meeting coming up. Stop the War are hosting an event in support of Julian on the 23rd of February, which I believe is this Tuesday. That's at 6:30. That's hosted by Daniel Kubidi, who's the Vice President of the National Education Union. And that is with Tariq Ali and Yvonne Ridley. So you can join that event by going and having a look at their website. Okay, so just coming back now, so just to let you all know who you're watching, you can add your comments and questions in the Q&A, which is right along the bottom of your screen. Before I start taking questions and fielding them to the panel, I'm going to be really, really cheeky and just abuse my position as chair a little bit, because something I've been dying to ask John is, Julian is still being pursued under the new administration. What does that tell us about the incoming Biden administration?
Well, I don't think that's particularly surprising. Biden in the past has referred to Julian as a cyber terrorist, although he was also part of the administration, the Obama administration, of course, which parked the whole procedure. So I think it's, even though in response to public campaigning, actually, the Biden administration issued a statement saying they were still pursuing the extradition. I imagine that isn't quite a closed and finished decision, because no new Attorney General has been appointed. So it may be, and it's certainly worth campaigning for this to happen, that the Biden administration simply drops the charges and Julian walks free. That would be the quickest, the simplest, and the most complete end that could be to this whole trial. So that's definitely an aim worth having. Whether they will or whether they won't, I don't know. And you can never quite tell with these things. Our job is to put the pressure and see what the pressure brings. So, you know, I think it was Noam Chomsky said that the American political system is a totalitarian system with two different factions, and of course that is pretty much how US politics works. So I don't hold out a lot of hope, but it may be that a Biden administration wants to continue to send messages that it's very different from the Trump administration, and it may be that this is the point where it could do so. I mean, it certainly could do so. So I don't necessarily expect it to happen, but I think it's worthwhile campaigning, and I don't think probably that an absolutely final decision has been taken inside that administration yet.
Thanks, John. We've got a question from Niall Farrell in Ireland to Tim. Has the NUJ been able to make the Assange case repress freedom an issue within the general trade union movement, TUC, etc.?
Yeah, we have. Thank you, Niall, for the question. We have, I think. We've certainly got some unions on board, but obviously want more to get involved. I think as a union, we have a lot of credibility within the TUC, because we're not seen as political. We're not affiliated to the Labour Party, for example. So we're seen as a kind of neutral union in that sense. And when we talk about press freedom, people tend to look at us and think, okay, well, you know what you're talking about. And they understand the issues are very important. So we are making headway, certainly within the trade union movement, more than you might think with all the political connotations surrounding Julian's campaign. But we're making a good start, and we're going to keep doing that all the way through, because it is very important for all trade unions.
Okay, Alina says, so nice to hear that Irish MPs have also sent in a request for video briefing. I have a question. Now that there's a ruling, the court cannot enforce the UK-US treaty. Can MPs raise the matter with the government again and again, like Richard Bergen did? But the Foreign Office managed to dodge it. The treaty is in force. Article 4.1 is there. So the logical conclusion to make it is that it's up to the government to uphold the ban on extradition for political offences. So Priti Patel or other senior secretary not only can, but must step in to release Assange, or at least it would be useful to get her opinion on the record. So, John, do you want to take that one? You're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of boring people who aren't specialists in this area, let me put this as concisely as I possibly can. The extradition treaty is a treaty agreed between the government of the United States and the UK government. But for it to have the force of UK law, it has to become an act of parliament, so a separate act of parliament to the treaty. In the treaty, the right of the political defence exists. In the Act of Parliament, it doesn't. So the American prosecution are relying on the treaty to extradite Julian, but relying on the Act of Parliament when they say that there is no political defence. So what the Americans are doing, it's kind of like a Schrodinger's treaty. At one moment, the political defence is there. At another moment, when it's inconvenient, it's not there. So what's happened, and I think MPs are beginning to realise this, is when the extradition treaty was rushed through by the Blair government as part of the whole war on terror panic, they legislated badly, poorly. They didn't even manage to get all the conditions of the treaty into the British legislation. And even Tory MPs, for their own reasons, are now very unhappy with this extradition treaty because they see it as unequal. And it is. Something like 200 British citizens have been extradited to the United States, whereas only 11 Americans have been extradited to the UK. And the Anne Sakulis case, the CIA agent who ran down Harry Dunn, the young motorcyclist outside a USAF airbase, has underlined this in real time while the Assange case has been going on. So I think that there is pressure there that really only parliamentarians can bring. You know, people who were in Parliament at that time say, actually, it was understood that the political offences defence would still exist and that the government are misinterpreting even the debate in Parliament by pretending that it doesn't. So the short version of this is it's a mess and only the Tory and Labour MPs can sort this out. And some of them are interested in doing this, and we're certainly putting pressure for that to be the case.
Thanks, John. Question now for, well, for everybody really, but I might pick on you actually, David. Do the panel think, as Julian can't consult with his lawyers in preparation for his trial, do we demand his immediate release from Belmarsh when we lobby politicians? I know the position is to call for his release and all charges to be dropped. Politicians here in Ireland say they can't raise the issue with the Irish Parliament of calling on Biden to drop the charges as the case is before the courts.
Did you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
I wasn't sure what the question was.
Sorry, should I repeat the question? Do the panel think that as Julian can't consult with his lawyers in preparation for his trial, do we demand his immediate release from Belmarsh when we lobbied politicians? I know the position is to call for his release and all charges to be dropped. Politicians here in Ireland say they can't raise the issue in the Irish Parliament of calling on Biden to drop the charges as the case is before the courts.
So the question is, should his immediate release be called for? Well, I would have thought yes, but I mean, John's probably the better person to answer that question.
Okay, John, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, because he's in the remarkable situation of having committed no crime and serving time in a high security prison, when even the request for his extradition has been struck down by the magistrate's court. His defence team did, of course, apply for bail, and that was refused by the same judge on the basis that he was a flight risk, which is an incredible thought for her to have, because she doesn't seem to have understood the impact of her own judgment. The fact that there's been a judgment in Britain, which means that he isn't currently subject to extradition pending appeal, it's the only country in the world where he would be free. If he went to France or Germany or anywhere else, the United States would be completely free to start a whole nother extradition proceeding in those countries and clap him back in jail. So the idea that having been freed by a British court, he would go anywhere else is completely mad. But that's where we are. I mean, those of us who've looked at this long enough know that quite extraordinary things keep happening in the Assange case. So yes, he should certainly be out on bail pending the appeal.
Thanks, John. Question for Tim. What are the implications of this on press freedom and journalists' ability to protect their sources?
Well, obviously it's really serious, which is why we're getting involved in it. As I said earlier on at the beginning, I'm not sure who asked the question whether they caught it or not. But basically, the risk is that journalists, we rely on sources, we rely on protecting our sources. Our integrity is really important to us, and if these sources dry up for whatever reason, then that really damages our ability to report on things. And I think, as John mentioned earlier on this afternoon, about the importance of people, blowing the whistle on what the government's doing. And if we believe that we've got a right to know what our government is doing in our name, then journalism is a really important part of that process. So that's the real concern. The concern is that if it goes through and if it's prosecuted and jailed, that the kind of the collateral damage, if you like, on journalists will be immense, and our ability to do our job, because whistleblowers will stop coming forward. Journalists themselves might stop reporting stuff for fear that they'll go to prison as well, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? We know why they're doing this.
Sure. Question from Andy Waters. Is it not the case now that Julian is now classic collateral damage in creating a climate of fear among US citizens and the citizens of the wider free world, i.e. to ensure that future would-be whistleblowers are sufficiently deterred from revealing government or government agency crimes, and therefore the ideal scenario is for Julian to die? I imagine the US and the UK are both involved and have agreed that this is the best outcome. So it is no longer directly about Julian, but about policy and purpose. I'm going to direct this one at you, Susie, if that's all right.
So the question is, the US is trying to create a culture of fear. Sure, yeah.
And that Julian's ultimate death, I mean, I presume that they mean a suicide and a supermax would be the ultimately desired outcome for the US.
I mean, there are definitely people who think the desired outcome is just to keep him, whether he's in Belmarsh or whether he's in a US prison. But I think, yeah, the point is to create a culture of fear. And that's why, as we're all discussing, it's really important to keep up the pressure on the political points. Yeah, but it is. And I think that's why so many press freedom groups came out so strongly with mixed feelings about the verdict. Obviously relieved that he won, but also really concerned because this kind of gives the US a little bit the best of both worlds. They don't look too extreme if he's coming to a US supermax, but they still get the message out that if I were a whistleblower, I don't know how I'd feel or about doing something these days. I'd think twice. So I think, yeah, I think they are trying to do that. I don't know if anyone else would like to weigh in. Cool.
Okay, well, we'll go to another final question then, and then I will bring the panel back in to sum up. So final question from Belinda. Many supporters question whether we should campaign to get Julian house arrest. I feel that the defence team is focusing on the appeal. would we be able to get Julian house arrest if the appeal is denied and the case goes to the higher court? So, John, I presume you would be the best person to answer that question.
Well, that would have been the outcome of him being granted bail. He wouldn't have just been sort of, well, he'd been released into lockdown, so he certainly wouldn't have been able to go shopping in Westfield anyway. But that wouldn't have been the condition. The condition would have been house arrest and tagging. So that's what bail would mean. Perhaps wrongly, but it would. But that's what it would. That's what it would mean. So once bail was turned down, house arrest was turned down because that was the bail offer that the defence made. I think the way you have to look at this is we have to try all these things. We have to put these arguments, and that any step forward both relieves the pressure immediately on Julian. I mean, anybody who has even done what I've done, which is to visit Julian in Belmarsh, knows what an absolutely grotesque experience that is. And I just mean visiting the place. I can't imagine what it's like to be in there month after month after month, and now year after year. It is simply going there is a god-awful Orwellian experience. This is a place where, in the entirely concrete exercise yard, the prison has official slogans painted on the wall which say, feel the grass between your feet, which has similarly Orwellian slogans painted on the visiting hall about valuing your friends and your family. Of course, the very people you can't see hardly at all, and now in lockdown can't see at all. So house arrest might not be a fair result, but it would be, believe me, for Julian, an enormous act of liberation. So, and I think also for us to get him out at all under any conditions would be further momentum in the campaign. And I think that's how we have to look at these things. You know, we don't always get in political campaigning. I think if you do it long enough, you realize this. You don't always get what you want in the way that you want it under the conditions that you'd most like it. But you take what you can win, and then you build on that, and then you push further to get more of what you need. And I think that's what's worked in this campaign so far, and it's a mentality that we need to cultivate going forward.
Thanks, John. And just to say to everybody, we have solidarity greetings from New York City for Assange. So hello and thanks for that. So I'm going to bring the panelists back in to sum up, starting with you, Susie, if that's all right.
I would just say, as John said, you know, hats off to everyone on this call. There are campaigners and solidarity groups from around the world. So thank you for all you've been doing. And hopefully we've only got maybe a few months ahead of us to keep pushing for a final victory. I remember the first one of these sort of online meetings I joined was last summer, which I think was maybe about 7 months ago. And I just hope in 7 months' time, we might, you know, have a victory and have maybe Julian joining one of these meetings, because I would love to hear from him, and I would love to hear him have a public profile again and be speaking directly to everyone. You know, on a side note, I worked on the campaign of somebody who was in Guantanamo, who was innocent and there for 15 years. And there's a movie coming out about him, The Mauritanian. And it's beautiful to see him now being able to speak and be interviewed and speak for himself. So I really hope we're at the end of this horrific journey. And I just really say hats off and admiration to everyone around the world who's been doing this relentless and sometimes thankless work. But it really has sort of crossed over at this point. And I think in a few months' time, we may be celebrating, touch wood.
Thank you, Susie. David?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I just emphasize, I mean, endorse what other people said. You know, this is a momentous case, and if, as it looks like we've turned a corner in it, then you know, I hope to soon see the end of this incarceration, incredible incarceration that he's faced. And we need to, I think, all of us rededicate ourselves to campaigning against injustice, yes, but also, as I said before, to investigating injustice ourselves, because no one else will do it for us. It's only going to be us now that the notion of investigative journalism in the mainstream press is nothing. It's a joke. So all it is investigation of essentially us and not the powerful. So I look forward to that. I think that there's a lot that we can do on the left to unearth the crimes of the powerful, which the powerful don't really anticipate or understand how we're able to do it. But so I'm in favour of that. We should do more of it.
Thanks, David. And you can have a look at David's website. Is that spinwatch.org, David? What's the address for your website?
Yeah, spinwatch.org, or our wiki website, which profiles powerful actors in the world, corporate and state actors, powerbase.info.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. And Tim?
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree with what Susie and David said. It's hats off to everybody here who's campaigning. It's not always an easy campaign, is it? I know, again, referring to the question I was asked about other trade unions, some people look at us and think, well, what are you doing touching Julian Assange's case? But he said, well, it's a matter of principle, isn't it? It's really important. I know journalists aren't everybody's favourite cup of tea. I used to start, I see David smiling now. I used to start when I was president of my union. I used to start my speeches with, not all journalists are bastards. I'm embarrassed sometimes by the state of our industry as well. Lots of different reasons for it, but you've got to remember there's some very good journalists out there who are trying to do their job.
Sorry, Tim. I'm an NUJ member as well, as you well know.
So it is difficult, but this is a matter of principle, isn't it? Regardless of whether you like journalists or not, regardless of whether you think the Mail or the Sun is a pile of whatever, it's important we have a vital role to play in democracy. And this is all about the principle, isn't it? Again, one of the phrases I used to use was, who will ask the questions when we're gone? The people have to be there to hold governments to account. And this is quite blatantly an attempt to silence journalists and to silence whistleblowers. So please keep up the good work. And yeah, I admire everybody for taking the time out this afternoon and all the work you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. And John, will come lastly to you. I will just say very, very quickly, there was a question in the chat, which was along the lines of, basically, how can we do more? How can people at home get involved? If they've not been involved in the campaign so far, how can they get involved?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think, Tim and David were talking about the reputation of journalists, and I didn't realise I'm in the NUJ as well, so we could have had a sort of caucus or a branch meeting here. But the thing about journalists is they're like everybody else. Nobody expects all plumbers to be politically great or all electricians to be politically great. No, of course they're not. It's just another profession. People are earning a living. But at vital moments in the society, often when the whole society moves, they need to find a voice and a way of articulating and projecting what people are feeling. And that's when critical journalists are absolutely essential. And if the laws don't help them, if the laws hinder them or prevent them, then we're in trouble, because it's not the voice of the people have the imagination that what's going on here is the kind of remarkable figure like John Pilger, who is a remarkable figure and so forth. But it's not. It's about ordinary people are going to do remarkable things, and they're going to want to see them reported. And as part of being one of us, some journalists are going to want to do that. And we've got to make sure they have both the capacity and the legal framework which allows them to do that. And that's what this case is about. Julian, there's a famous phrase which is turned into a meme and so forth, which goes around, where Julian says, if wars can be started by lies, they can be ended by the truth. And that's, it's a really good phrase, and it's true up to a point. But it's also true with WikiLeaks that WikiLeaks was formed in 2010. Now, the anti-war movement, as I know from long experience, had been going since 2002, 2003. So the audience for WikiLeaks existed before WikiLeaks. And then WikiLeaks existed and amplified and expressed things that that audience wanted to know and needed to hear and helped empower it. So actually the relationship is more complex between what journalists do and what the rest of us are doing. They're part of us and we're part of them. And that's the way to look at it. It's like defending yourself when we're defending journalists. It's defending your own right to know and to express things. So that's, I think, how we should look at that. And, you know, nobody would surrender their own voice. Nobody would agree to being quieted themselves or made illegal for them to express their views. And that's why defending journalism is about defending your own right to speak and to know. How to do it? I'll be brief. I know time's short. Well, first of all, go to the DEA website. There's loads of things you can do there. There are petitions, there are future meetings, there are lobby tools. There's everything that you could possibly want to do. And I doubt if I've done all of them. So if I haven't, I'm sure other people haven't either. If you've done some of it, great. If you've done none of it, doesn't matter. Start now. And get campaigning. It's the only thing that power recognizes. You know, ordinary people, they don't have money, they don't have guns, they don't have access to the media or to the corridors of power. So they've really only got two things. One is numbers, and the other is organization. And to be honest, the numbers aren't any good without the organization. So get organized. Get into your trade union, get into your local community group, get into a political party. I don't actually care. I'd prefer that you join the political party that I was in, but I'd much prefer that you join something and do something than you do nothing. But whatever you do about this campaign, start having an organized relationship with the rest of us. Start taking those petitions, giving money to that crowdfunder, lobbying your MPs, because those are collectively organized campaigns. They're an individual action that you take, but they're significant because organized thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are taking the same action. And that has an impact. It changes the political environment. It changes the context in which decisions, including legal decisions, are made. So there's a lot more of us than there are of them, but it only matters if you start getting organized to express those numbers in political pressure. So that's what I'd say all of us can do.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. So if you haven't already, get over to the Don't Extradite Assange website. Thank you very much for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thanks to all my panelists. And don't forget the meeting on Tuesday. Bye-bye.
In democracies, wars are a result of lies. And why one might think that that should lead us to a state of despair, it should lead us also to an optimistic understanding. Because if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth.